Good evening. Russia's tactics in Ukraine are once again under scrutiny. Tonight it launched an attack on Lviv in the west, just a day after it said it was concentrating operations in the east. Russia also said it was targeting Ukraine's military infrastructure and released video of cruise missiles being launched. President Biden responded by sending a clear message to Moscow that America believes its NATO commitments are sacred. More on that in a moment. First, from Lviv and the scene of that latest attack, our correspondent Geraint Vincent reports.
Saturday afternoon in Lviv, and black smoke spreads across the sky. This is a Ukrainian city hundreds of miles away from the main fight to repel the Russian invasion. But what the Ukrainian government says were 2 cruise missiles struck here today. This man works in a market close by. The force of the explosions, he said, felt like an earthquake. 1 week ago, Russia attacked an airport in this city, which was being used to repair planes from Ukraine's Air Force. Today's target was a fuel depot. The day after, Russia's defense ministry announced that it was refocusing its offensive in the east of Ukraine. Explosions here in Lviv, just a few miles from Ukraine's border with the EU. In the east, the misery of an invaded people continues. The assault on the port city of Mariupol grinds on, and stories of survival are harrowing. This man from Mariupol told us that he and his family lived in a cellar for 2 weeks. There were lots of bodies, he said. People were dying around us. Meanwhile, much of the Russian assault in Ukraine is now in ruins, an advance which in many places has been reversed. Ukraine's president praised what he calls hero cities for their resistance. Our defenders are forcing the Russian leadership to a simple conclusion, he said. There must be talks, urgent, meaningful and fair. But Moscow appears in no mood to talk. Instead, it released images today of missiles being launched on Ukrainian targets. And the defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, who hasn't been seen in public for 2 weeks, appeared on television talking about the readiness of Russia's nuclear arsenal. And the missiles which landed in Lviv this afternoon, just as America's president was paying a visit to neighbouring Poland, came with a message. All of Ukraine remains within Russia's reach, and anything which might help the Ukrainian war effort will be hit. Geraint Vincent, ITV News, Lviv.
Good evening. Within the last hour, President Biden, in a major speech, said Vladimir Putin cannot remain in power after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He was speaking in the Polish capital Warsaw and said the battle between democracy and dictatorship was the fight of our generation. He also warned Mr. Putin to not even think of moving on an inch of NATO territory. Earlier, he described the Russian leader as a butcher following a meeting with refugees who'd fled the fighting. Well, with the war now in its second month, the areas in red here show Russia's current troop positions in Ukraine. Today, there were large explosions in the western city of Lviv, close to the border with Poland, as missiles hit a fuel storage depot, and there were reports of further strikes a little later. More on that in a moment, but first, reporting from the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, here's Jeremy Bowen.
The Russians released these pictures of a cruise missile launched from the Black Sea Fleet, a reminder that they have a lot of firepower left. In the almost deserted villages between Kyiv and the Russians, reminders are not necessary. They've been battered. This is Lyshanka, about an hour's drive west of Kyiv. The Ukrainians claim they have the Russians on the run here. It didn't feel like that. These are the remains of Russian cluster munitions dropped on Friday evening.
Why are they hitting you here?
Because here many Ukrainian warriors, and this is line of front, of war front.
How far are the Russians from here?
1 kilometer from here. Russian warriors 1 kilometer from here.
Civilian houses were hit. So many residents have left that they said there were no casualties. Kate and her family had only gone as far as Kyiv.
I just want to live my life in my town, in my country, and I just don't know why they are doing this, why Russians are doing this.
A short walk away, another house was destroyed. The owners don't have anything to come back to. The neighbors were fixing their house. Volodymyr said the Russians were responding to Ukrainian shelling, but he said our guys won't leave until they drive the Russians away. Ukrainian resistance derailed Russia's plans, but claims they're being forced to retreat around here are premature.
It still feels some of the heat from the fire caused by the missile that hit this house. It doesn't feel at all as if anything is settled around here. I'd be very cautious about assuming that simply because the Russians say they will concentrate more on eastern Ukraine, that their business around the capital is finished.
They were prosperous here before the invasion, with a riding school stabling 40 horses. When this horse was wounded in an attack earlier in the month, the man who looked after it was killed. Smaller incidents don't make headlines, but take lives and change them. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Kyiv.
In a moment, we'll hear from our North America editor, Sarah Smith, who's travelling with President Biden and is in the Polish capital, Warsaw. But first to Lucy Williamson in the western city of Lviv, where that fuel depot was targeted by Russian missiles. Lucy, what more can you tell us?
Well, there have been 5 or 6 explosions across the city of Lviv tonight, seemingly from different areas of the city. The mayor has said that there has been significant damage to infrastructure facilities, but the only confirmed target we have so far is that fuel storage depot you mentioned. It was hit, sending plumes of black smoke into the sky, and when we were there a short time ago, a fire was still raging inside that depot. 5 people, we are hearing, have been injured in that strike, and what makes this slightly different from all the other strikes that we've had in this region is its location. The depot is less than 2 miles from the city centre. It's surrounded by cafes, restaurants, residential premises. I think there are many people here in Lviv who told me over and over again, this is a safe haven, this is a refuge from this war, and there are people here tonight who are still determined to believe that, even as it's getting harder and harder to do.
OK, Lucy, thank you for that. To you, Sarah, in Warsaw, President Biden, in that speech suggesting Vladimir Putin cannot remain in power.
Yes, he said that at the end of the speech, and earlier in the day he described Vladimir Putin as a butcher. And he delivered this deeply impassioned speech here in Warsaw because he wants to demonstrate America's commitment to defending Poland as well as every other NATO ally. And he warned Vladimir Putin in the speech, don't even think of touching an inch of NATO territory. He said Article 5 of NATO, which of course says that an attack on one member is an attack on all, is a sacred obligation. And he said that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was an historic mistake.
Rather than breaking Ukrainian resolve, Russia's brutal tactics have strengthened the resolve. Rather than driving NATO apart, the West is now stronger and more united than it has ever been. Russia wanted less of a NATO presence on his border, but now he has a stronger presence, a larger presence, with over 100,000 American troops here, along with all the other members of NATO.
President Biden is casting the war in Ukraine as a fundamental battle between democracy and dictatorship. And he says it is part of the long historic struggle for freedom. But he had a warning for the West as well. He said that they need to remain in this for the long haul, that it won't be easy and that there will be costs, but that this is the test of our generation. And at the end of his speech, he declared that Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia.
Good evening and welcome to BBC London. I'm Lee Milner. Thousands of people have marched through the city today to show solidarity with the people of Ukraine. Organised by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, the march received support from Hollywood stars Dame Helen Mirren and Dame Julie Walters. A vigil was also held this afternoon, as Alison Earle reports.
A sea of blue and yellow, flags, banners and balloons. Thousands turned up to march in central London, all with the same message.
Stop Putin, stop the war.
Both my parents are Ukrainian. So they came over in the war, just after the war in 1946, so have to show solidarity. And this is my daughter.
Yeah. So I only found out yesterday that this was on, and Dad texted me, so I thought, why not show support?
We started at the back of the march and then kind of ambled our way through and then got here, and we were really happy to see how many people were actually here in support. And
yeah, incredibly surprised. Turned the corner and just saw a sea of people and just thought, brilliant. You know, it made me really emotional, actually.
Yeah.
Walking along Park Lane and towards Piccadilly, the march was organised after Ukraine's president urged people across the world to take to the streets to mark a month since Russia's invasion.
I'm so proud of the response of Londoners over the last few days and weeks, not simply donating money to help those charities and groups supporting those who have either fled Ukraine or are in Ukraine, but also the numbers of Londoners opening their homes for those fleeing from Ukraine. It is really important that we stand shoulder to shoulder with them.
Teresa is Ukrainian and has family caught up in the conflict. In the last 2 weeks, her sister made it safely to London, but she fears for those who are still there.
One of my friends' family, they was sleeping in a pan with a pan on their heads because there was frightened of the bombing, and they were living 8 days without electricity and water.
It comes as Sadiq Khan announced just over £1 million in funding to support people seeking asylum here, to send a message that London stands with them. Alison Earle, BBC London.